Hi everyone, we'll get started in just a second. All right, everyone, hello, and welcome to Learning to Make a Pie. I'm Dr. Lauren Friedman. I am the Director for Student Success here at the Chicago School, and I am really excited to show you all how to make a pie. I hope that everyone can hear me. I have a very small kitchen, so I am doing the best I can. I've got a little tripod set up, and I'm going to try and show you a couple different angles so that you can get a full view. And so I'm going to just hop right in. Hi to everyone. Hi, Cindy. And we have a few people on, so I'm just going to hop right in. The thing I love about making pies is that it gives you a lot of freedom and flexibility with what you can do with the pie. Today I'm going to be making apple hand pies. And at a lot of the different steps, you can make choices to make it your own and to make it the way you like it. And I'll be talking a little bit about each of those when we get there. The other great thing is you don't need a lot of kitchen utensils. Some baking things, you need piping bags, you need a stand mixer, very basic things needed for a pie. And so that is really great and really easy. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. If you get seasick, look away for a second because I'm gonna angle you down at my cutting board so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. So I'm hoping that this will work and stay. Okay, so the first thing that we're gonna do is we are going to peel and cut our apples. So the best thing about the pie, like I said, is that you can kind of make it your own. Actually, I'm gonna wash my hands first, is the first step. You can kind of make it your own, and this is one of the points already where you can do that. You can choose to cut your apples into slices. You can choose to cut them into little squares. You can choose to do like half and half. For the apple hand pies, the best thing that I found is to do little dices of apples. So the first thing you're gonna need to gather all of your supplies. And so for an apple pie, I'm hoping that you all can see this. You're gonna need 6 to 7 apples. You're gonna need 1/2 to 1 tablespoon of flour. You're gonna need spices. I like to use the pumpkin pie spice that's already pre-mixed, but you can also make your own using cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, and all those good things. You're gonna need brown sugar. You're gonna need regular sugar, and you're gonna need some butter. So once you've gathered all of those ingredients, the first thing you're gonna do is peel and dice your apples. So, I'm gonna do a half recipe now because I've already made some. So you'll be doing 6 to 7 apples. I'm gonna do 4 now, just for sake of timing, really. So just peel them. I'm using a vegetable peeler. You can also use a knife. My grandma was old school. She always used a paring knife to peel her fruits and vegetables. But I find it a lot easier to use a vegetable peeler. One of the good things about using this is when you are done, you have some options on what you want to do with the peel. So you can throw it away, you can compost it. You can also coat them in some sugar and cinnamon and bake them in the oven at about 375 for like a half hour, 350 for like a half hour. And they'll get crispy and make little apple peel chips. And they're delicious. And it helps you to use all the different parts of the apple that you have spent some money on. The other nice thing is, I don't know how many of you have gone apple picking, but apple pies take up a good amount of apples. So if you are going apple picking and at the end of your apple picking adventure, you have a ton of apples left, an apple pie is a quick way to use a lot of them. You'll also see on this apple that I have a bruise. It's okay. I kept this one here just to show you this. You can use bruised apples as long as they're not fully like mushy and gross. You can use a bruised apple in an apple pie and it won't really hurt your pie at all. So if you have some apples that are, you know, on the way to going bad, don't worry about it. This is a great way to use them. So we're just peeling. And if you have any questions as we go, I am keeping an eye on the chat, so don't be afraid to put them in there. The kinds of apples that I like to use, I like to use a mixture of apples. Some people will say straight up just use Granny Smith, and that's these green ones. I like to use a mixture, some sweet, some tart, so that I get a good blend in my apples. So the apples I'm using today, I've got some Granny Smith, and I've got some Granny Smith and some Fuji. But you can use Macintosh, you can use whatever is on sale at the store. I always recommend to include at least 1 or 2 Granny Smiths because they tend to be tart and they tend to be a little bit harder. So they will help give some more texture to your pie. So like I said, you can use these peels, you can throw them away. The apple chips that you can make from them are pretty good and pretty easy. I'm not going to do that right now, but it is an option. And if you'd like the recipe, you can always reach out to me and I can send it to you. And then one more. Like I said, you'll be doing 6 to 7 apples. I didn't want to take a lot of time, so I figured I would just do 4. You'll notice already, well, you won't notice, but when you're doing this at home, you'll notice already that your house starts to smell like apples because you've peeled so many and there's apple juices and it already starts to smell really good. Okay, so I've got all of my apples peeled. I'm going to get all the peels out of the way. And the next step is to cut your apples. So like I said, I'm gonna do a small dice on my apples. Some people prefer, if you're doing a full-size pie, to do apple slices. Either way works. You can do dices in a full-size pie as well. And you could do, I guess, slices in a hand pie, but it's a little bit easier to do the little dice because it's easier to put into the pie or the hand pie and have it maintain a good size. So I tried to do the easiest way possible and I just cut 4 sides off around the core and that gives me 4 chunks of apple that I can then use. And to dice it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that you guys see me. I'm going to just cut cut down the side there in the half, and then I'm going to cut strips. Try to keep your strips as even in size as possible. It's not super important for apple pies that everything is even because of the way you'll be cooking it, but it's always helpful and it looks neater if you have everything kind of in an even size. So that one's kind of small. I also have over here just a bowl that I'm going to put all of my slices in. So just cut them quick dice. Oops, as I slide and almost cut my finger off. Be careful when you're cutting. Don't cut your fingers. And that really helps if you have a sharp knife. So if you have a sharper knife, you're less likely to cut your fingers, which seems counterintuitive, but it'll glide more easily through your apple, and you can then have less likelihood of chopping your fingers. So I'm just doing little dices. You can see they're not super big, bite-sized pieces, a little bit less than bite-size. They'll cook down a little bit while you have them on the heat, but you don't want to make them too big. Thank you for the thumbs up, Akshaya. I'm betting that was in response to not cutting your fingers off. Alright, so we've got one apple almost done. So like I said, we're just going to cut a little corner around the core of the apple. You can see in that one, I have a little bit of the core left on there, and what I'll do is I'll just cut that out. You don't really want the core in your apples for your apple pie because it's not a pleasant texture. So you can just pull, be careful, don't cut your hands, and just pull that centerpiece out. Just continue chopping. If you want to do slices, I'll show you exactly how to do the slices, not a gross one. Really easy. Just do them pretty thin and just go straight down, and then you'll have nice little apple slices that you can use. A lot of people like that texture better because it's a little bit more apple-y. It's definitely a little bit more traditional. If you want to make a very traditional apple pie, that's the way to go. But because we're doing hand pies, we're not gonna keep them like that. The reason I chose hand pies, if you are wondering, is because you don't need a pie pan to make them. I know sometimes our students don't have, a bunch of utensils, or like me, don't have a bunch of space for kitchen utensils. And so if you do, hello. If you do make pies, hand pies, you don't need the pie pan. Someone asked on there, how did I get into baking? It's an interesting story. My grandfather is from Holland, and when he came over during World War II, he opened up a bakery. And so baking has always been in my family. He opened a kosher bakery in Wheaton, Maryland. It's still a bakery. It's not a kosher bakery anymore, but it is a bakery still. It was called the Wooden Shoe, and I grew up there. I always, my mom worked there for a long time. Whenever my grandfather needed somebody to fill in, we worked there. And so while he was alive, I was exposed to baking. I would sit in the back and I would decorate cupcakes with him. And so that's how I got into baking. I didn't bake for a long time when I was in college because I didn't really have a kitchen in my dorm. But I find that it's a really good stress relief for me. And it's nice because you have to do some, measuring and following instructions and things like that, but you can also get really creative with it. So like I said, that's one of the reasons I like pies, because you have to follow the recipe for your pie crust, and you have to make sure everything's measured out for the pie crust and things like that. But once you have the crust, you can be really creative with the fillings. My mom used to come home and she would find me in the kitchen baking, and she would know that I was stressed out or that I needed, that I had a bad day. And so it just kind of grew from there. But pies are my favorite thing to bake. So just dicing and dicing and dicing. Apple pies are not only for Thanksgiving. You can do them any time of the year, and people will still enjoy it. I think that people just really like the warm spices for fall and winter, but you can use things to brighten up an apple pie. You could add lemon, you can add berries and things like that to make it more of a summery pie, if that's something that you're interested in. We're going to do just a very basic pie today, but you can find recipes all over Pinterest and cooking blogs and all kinds of things to help you figure out something to do any time of year. This is the most tedious part. Last one. Now, I know that I've wasted some good apple probably here on the core and the corners and things like that, because we know an apple core is not a rectangular shape. You can definitely take the time to go through and make sure you get all the good apple off of it, especially if you want to make sure that you're using all the parts of it. I'm not going to worry about that today. So you'll notice that as you're filling your pot, what didn't look like that many apples is going to look like a lot more. And so you got to make sure you're using a big bowl. Because my 4 apples, as you'll see in just a minute, have definitely filled this entire bowl, and you're going to be using 6 to 7. Janice asked, I think it's Janice, which baking show would you say is your favorite? I like watching the competitions. I could apply to be on one of them. Well, thank you. I like the Great British Baking Show, or if you're being true to form, the Great British Bake Off, which is what it's called in England, in the UK, where it's from. It's my favorite because it's nice, it's relaxing. Even though they're all in competition with each other, they're so nice to each other, and they help each other. Even if somebody, steals another person's ice cream on accident, they're all very nice. You can watch it on Netflix. We like to put it on before bed because it's so relaxing. So you can see here that those apples definitely took up a lot of room. My cuts are not super uniform, so that's not great. But here we go. Here's our apples. I also really like, going back to Janice's question, I also really like the Kids Baking Championships on Food Network. They have them oftentimes around the holiday, and they are so cute, and the kids are so talented, and it makes me feel a little bit bad about myself because those kids are so talented and so good at what they do. Okay, so now we have all of our apples diced. The next thing that we're gonna do is we are going to add in all of our kind of flavoring elements. I cheat because, like I said, I like to do it the easy way. And I get, now this is dirty because I use it a lot. But I get the pumpkin pie spice. This one's from Trader Joe's, but they have it anywhere that you can think of. And it's got in it cinnamon, ginger, a little bit of lemon, nutmeg, cloves, and cardamom. Everything that you would typically put inside of an apple pie is already here, mixed up, and made already. So I use that. I'm not gonna lie, I don't really measure. So if you like it to be extra cinnamony, extra flavorful, you can add more, you can add less. So I'm just gonna sprinkle some on, and then we'll see kind of what it looks like. I also like to add in some extra cinnamon because it's my favorite. I do not follow Nigella Lawson, but I will certainly look into that. I'm assuming she's a baker and that I should follow them. So we're gonna add the pumpkin pie spice. They also sell apple pie spice, but the pumpkin pie spice has a little bit more in it. The best bakers don't need to measure unless you're working with a dough. The dough you always have to measure. I'm gonna use, you would use 4 tablespoons of brown sugar. I'm gonna use 2 because I've only got the half size amount of the apples. So about 2, about 4. If you like it a little bit sweeter, use a little bit more. If you like it less sweet, use a little bit less. I like that kind of middle ground. So brown sugar. And then I also use a little bit of regular old white sugar. And so I recommend about 2 tablespoons for the 7 apples. I'm going to use 1 now because I only used the 4. Just sprinkle that on. Really simple. And then you're going to just mix it up. Make sure you get all of your apples coated. My apples are looking a little bit light for my taste. I like to have, like I said, a lot of spices going on. So I'm gonna add a little bit more spices. And maybe just a tad more brown sugar. Like I said, this is the fun part where you can kind of just do whatever makes you happy. Oof, and we are 23 minutes in. So, okay, that looks a little bit better. Mixed it up. Is there healthy? I'm guessing that says healthier options. Sure, you could use honey instead of sugar. You could use a sugar alternative like stevia. The spices, they're not bad for you, and the apples, they have sugar themselves. So you could certainly use something like apple or honey to make them a little bit sweeter, or an alternative. The thing about pies is there's a lot of butter. So if that is a concern to you, there are things, you can do things with shortening, you can do things with vegan butter, but pies in general are pretty full of butter. Okay, so if you get seasick, don't look. I'm going to try and turn you around. Sorry, like I said, we're kind of improvising here. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take a pot, and you're going to take a little bit of butter. I would say about 2 tablespoons, I think is what I wrote on our ingredient list. Yep, 2 tablespoons. And on butter, they always measure it out for you, which is really nice. And you're just gonna put that in over a medium heat. Let that melt for a second. And then it's starting to melt a little bit. You're just gonna dump all your apples right in the pot. Sometimes when you're doing this, you're gonna need a very big pot. You could use like a soup pot, or I have a Dutch oven that I use. And then you're just gonna mix it up so that you make sure the butter gets on everything. And we're just gonna let that cook. Basically because the time that you're gonna be baking the pie is not gonna be enough time for the apples to cook all the way through. So we're gonna pre-cook the apples before we make the pie. So we're gonna let that go, stirring occasionally until the apples are soft. Meanwhile, you're gonna work on your pie dough. The really important thing with pie dough is that everything has to be cold. Your butter has to be cold, your hands have to be cold, everything has to be cold in order for the pie dough to be really flaky. So what that means is at certain times throughout the process, you're going to be putting it in the refrigerator for like a half hour to 45 minutes to an hour. The easiest way to make a pie dough is using a food processor. If you have a food processor, it is the easiest way to do it. If you don't, you can always, there are alternatives. So this doohickey here is a pastry cutter. You can use that instead, but I'm going to show you, like I said, I like to cheat a little bit. I'm going to show you how to do it using the food processor. So, back to my counter here. You're going to be needing 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of sugar, 1 cup of cold butter cut into cubes, which is 2 sticks, and then 4 to 8 tablespoons of ice water. And it's really important, all of the stuff is cold. Of course, your flour and things will be at room temperature. As you're making your pie crust, keep an eye on your apples. They may need to be stirred. You don't want to let it stick to the bottom of the pan too much. Rhonda asked how long it takes to make the pie. The physical work is only probably, I would say, about like 45 minutes. But there are wait times in between where you will need to let the dough rest in the refrigerator. And then it bakes for about a half hour. So I'm going to put my food processor here. And the first thing we're going to do is take our flour. And when you're measuring out your flour, you don't just scoop it. I know that's instinctual. Just take this cup and just scoop it out. You don't want to do that. Actually, I'm going to switch these to keep the pie ingredients farther away from the stove. That will mess up your measurements because it'll compact the flour down into the cup. So what you're going to want to do, I call it the scoop and level method. I don't know if there is an actual name for it, but you're going to take a spoon and fill your measuring cup like this, and then tap, 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 and just level it off. And this part is so satisfying. So we're gonna put 1.5 cups of flour into our food processor, or if you're using a bowl, into your bowl, if you don't have a food processor. So that's a half. Tap, 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 tap. And then slide. That's 1. I don't know if you guys can hear the apples bubbling away. Tap, 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 tap. And then slide. Okay, so that's 1.5 cups in there. And let me see if this will work. I'm going to slide you over so you can see the apples. It kind of worked. So you can see they're starting to soften a little bit. There's a little bit of juices down at the bottom. So we're just going to stir them. Like I said. All right. So we've got 1.5 cups of flour in here. We're going to add a teaspoon of salt. That one you don't have to do the little thing. And then the tablespoon of sugar, which is optional. I wouldn't use honey or anything like that because you want it to be dry. You can use stevia. That would be fine. I think I've never tried it, but Janice asked if there's a reason for the chop, 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 or you can't just slide. I don't know. It's just what I've always done. Just to kind of pack it in there. I don't really know. I just like doing it. Okay, so I'm gonna warn you now, my dog hates the food processor, so you'll probably hear some barking, but she'll be okay. So after you've got 1.5 cups of flour, the teaspoon of salt, and the tablespoon of sugar, you're just gonna give it a quick pulse, just to kind of get it mixed up. And then you're gonna go to your refrigerator where your butter is still in, and you're gonna grab your butter. So you're gonna need 2 sticks. It's still in the refrigerator because we were keeping it cold. Keeping it cold is very important. 2 sticks. And actually, while you're over by your refrigerator, grab a cup and put some ice and some water in it. So just making some just ice water because you're going to need that in a minute and you want it to get cold. So you're going to take your butter that you just got out of the refrigerator. I can move this out of the way now. And you're going to chop it into, I don't know, 8 pieces. Just something to get a little bit smaller. So just doop, 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 doop. Oh, you can't see what I'm doing, can you? Doop, doop. And then just dump it in to your food processor. Oops. Sent a little flour flying. And your second stick. This is a lot of butter, but butter is what gives pie crust their texture and makes it flaky and delicious. Like I said, you can use, my friend's daughter is allergic to dairy, so she uses Smart Butter, which is vegan. Some recipes use shortening. You can certainly use that. But I just go for a traditional all butter crust. So you've got everything in your food processor. If you were using a bowl, at this point, you would take your pastry cutter, which is this, or you could use a fork, and you would just kind of mash it down until it forms like a sand. But that is a lot of arm work. So I am going to just use the food processor. My dog perked up already, so warning. So just do it for about 15 seconds until it looks like a sand. So if you remember, we only put 1.5 cups of the butter in here, or of the flour. So we're gonna add another cup of flour now that we've got it in a sandy texture. And we're trying to work quickly to keep everything fairly cold. So we're gonna do our scoop and chop method that Janice, I don't know why there's chopping, but there is. So 1/2 and 2. And there we go. So then you're just gonna run that for another second. Okay, so now that it's like a sandy texture, you have 2 options. You can add your water while it's in there and use that to use the muscle. The only thing is that it can sometimes get it a little bit overworked, which just means that your dough will be a little bit less flaky. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take it out and I am going to do the rest by hand. So take your sandy dough. Don't forget to stir your apples. Like I am. So they're getting kind of soft now. It just takes some time. They just gotta cook. And dump it all into a bowl. So you can see it's kind of sandy. If you were to feel it, see it sticks together a little bit. That's the butter mixed in with the flour. Okay, let me get this out of the way. So now the last piece is to add the ice water. And so how much water that you have to add depends on how much, depends on a lot of things. How much water is in your air, how humid it is. It depends on your altitude. It depends on a lot of things. So you start small and then you add more if you need to. So I'm gonna start with 2 tablespoons of water, which is also 1/8 cup. And you just put some in there, and then you take a spatula and just kind of press it. And obviously that wasn't enough because it's not that humid in here today. And you know, so another 2 tablespoons of my ice water. And you can see it's kind of starting to form bigger clumps. And what you're looking for is you want the dough to kind of collect on itself. So see how it's becoming more dough-like, what you picture? But we still have a lot of small clumps here. So I'm going to do another 2. So I think we're at 6 now of the 4 to 8. And I keep grabbing ice. And don't forget to stir your apples. I want them to burn onto the bottom of the pan. And we're going to just do 1 more. So I've got like 7.5 to 8 tablespoons in here, and it's pretty clumpy. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to wash my hands in the coldest water that I can stand. trying to cool down my hands as well as get them clean because I'm about to use them. But trying to get my hands cool so that we don't melt the butter while we're working it. So, cold water. Dry them off a little bit. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to combine this dough. The less you work it, the better. So just kind of push it onto itself until it forms dough. And you'll see like some of it will stick better, some of it will be little. So just push those little bits into the dough. If you find that it's really not sticking together, you can add a little bit more ice water. But just give it a second and try and work the little pieces in. So what you're going to do now is you are going to wrap this in plastic wrap. You can leave it in the bowl. If you have no room in your refrigerator like me, you could just take the plastic wrap out and wrap it around the dough ball. And you're going to refrigerate this for at least 45 minutes to an hour, just to let the glutens relax and to help the butter re-solidify and things like that. So I'm going to just clean my hands off a little bit. And this is where the major part of the work is done, minus forming the pies. So, and you'll notice your hands are a little bit buttery. And that all comes with being big. So this is what our apples look like now. You can see, sorry, it's a little bit steamy. You can see they're soft when I poke at them. They're a little bit caramelized. This is great. So we're going to take that off the heat. And we're going to let that cool for a while until you're ready to use it, really. Let it cool down a little bit so that it's not steaming anymore, and then put it in the refrigerator. So let me grab some plastic wrap. And you can just grab it. Get any pieces you missed. Just wrap it up. Let's stick it in the fridge. Like I said, 45 minutes to an hour. You can freeze it for up to 3 days. You have a lot of, you can prepare it in advance. In fact, what I did was I also prepared in advance because I knew you guys wouldn't want to sit around for 45 minutes while that cooled down. So I have prepared some dough. So now I'm going to show you how to form the apple hand pies. So this is what your dough will look like. It's definitely solid, but it's cool to the touch. And what we're going to do is we are going to preheat our oven to 375. And the easiest way I find to do the hand pies is to get a baking sheet out. If you can. Might stack on top of each other. So get a baking sheet out. You can tell mine are well loved. And if you have a silicone baking mat, you can use that. You can also just use parchment paper. And I'm going to roll it out right on here. So it's really easy to do. If you are making a regular pie, what you'll want to do is flour the surface and then roll it out there. But this is going to be a lot easier in terms of just space management. So you have your dough there. What we're gonna do is we're just gonna roll it out to be pretty thin. And you want it about 1/8 of an inch thin. So it might take a second to roll out because you want it thin enough to be crust. And it's cold, so it takes some muscle. So sorry if you hear me struggling a little bit. I'm using a porcelain rolling pin to help keep the cool, but if you have a wooden rolling pin, that's fine too. The porcelain just helps it stay a little bit colder. So try to get it nice and even, flat. If you find that your rolling pin is sticking, you can sprinkle some flour on top. It won't really mess up your measurements or anything like that. Just roll it down now. Okay. It's not as thin as I would like, so I'm just gonna cheat a little bit and spread it out. My hands, like I said, cheating, don't do that, but I'm just trying to get us done in time. Okay, so we've got it pretty thin. You can go a little bit thinner than what I've got it, but for demonstration purposes, this is fine. So with a hand pie, you want about a 3.5 inch circle. I don't have that in a cookie cutter, so I'm just going to use this Tervis mug. Shout out to Salisbury University. That's where I did my undergrad and my master's. And it's got about a 3.5 inch ring here. You could also use a cookie cutter, you could use a jar, whatever you have around would be totally fine. So I'm just going to cut out some circles. And for demonstration purposes, I'm only going to do 4, but obviously you would get more out of this dough, and they are a little bit thick. And generally after you cut them out, you would want to put them in the fridge for a few more minutes as well, just to re-cool them down. But I'm not going to do that right now because we're a little bit late on time. So the silicone mat, you don't have to put any like spray or anything like that on because it's silicone, so it won't stick. But if you don't have that, you could spray, you can use parchment paper, whatever you've got. And if you were to be doing a regular pie, you would of course roll this out big enough to fill your pie tin and just lay it on there. So we've got two pies that we're going to make here, because each pie will take 2 pieces. So what you're going to do is after your apple pie filling is all cooled down, I cheated and made some pre-made one. You could see it solidified a little bit. It's a little bit like mushy, like what you would envision an apple pie filling to be. It's really simple. You're just going to take some and put it in the middle of one of your circles. It's okay if you overfill them a little bit, but you don't want to fill them too much. You want to make sure that you have enough, but not too much. And then you're just going to take one of your things. See, these are really thick. I'm going to thin this out a little bit. And you're just going to place it on top. Push down the sides and the edges. Just pull this off. Push it onto the edges. And then use a fork to seal it. It also kind of makes it a little bit pretty. Just gonna boop. And this will seal the bottom piece of dough to the top piece of dough. Let me actually pull that one up so that it's not too close to the other one. Sorry guys, this is apparently a struggle today. So I'm gonna just move it, reshape it as you need to. Make sure the edges are all set. And then do the same thing with the second pie. The recipe for the dough I gave you should yield you about, I'd say, 6 pies. And then take a sharp knife and just score it a little bit. So give it a place to let the steam escape. The last thing you're gonna do for these is you're gonna make a little bit of an egg wash. Sorry, this looks gross. You're gonna wanna make a little bit of an egg wash. And that is really, really easy. All you're gonna do is you're gonna take a little bowl and you're gonna take an egg. And this is not a required step. It just makes it look prettier. So you're gonna take an egg. You're gonna crack it. You're gonna add a little bit of water. So I'll still get some ice water here. Mix it up. And then take a brush, or you can use your fingers. That's kind of the quick way to do it. And just brush the tops of your pies with the egg wash. And that'll give them a little bit of like a more brown, golden color when they're done. Otherwise, they'll be a little bit pale. You don't have to be neat about it. Just slap it on there. And then what I like to do is take a little bit of sugar. Just, you know, make it a little bit extra sweet. And just sprinkle it on the top as well. And then I also like to take a little bit of cinnamon. As you know, I said earlier, I love cinnamon. And sprinkle that on top as well. And there you have them. This doesn't look pretty. I would suggest doing it a little bit neater. So you're gonna take these and bake them in your oven at 375 for about a half hour or until they look golden brown. And then you take them out and you let them cool off, and there you go. If you're doing a full-size pie, you're gonna want to do it a little bit longer than a half hour, maybe about 45 minutes, and you'll be all set. And sorry, should have warned you about being seasick. So that is how you make a traditional apple pie. I hope you all can see me okay. I have terrible angles. But thank you all for joining me. I hope everyone is doing well with their schoolwork and with the end of the semester coming up. I hope everyone is staying safe and staying healthy. And I can't wait to see you all when we're back on campus. Thank you for joining me, and enjoy your apple pies.